Hey everyone, Rich Monroe here with B&B Investing Group. Thanks for jumping on this week. As a reminder, B&B Investing Group works with investors to navigate the short-term rental world, whether you're doing acquisitions for properties, rental arbitrage, or managing other people's properties. And so we work with investors to kind of help look at those options to build a scalable business. If you're in the process of wanting to get started with that and want to learn more about how we might be able to work together, feel free to shoot me a message on Facebook Messenger, and we can schedule a quick 10-minute call to check in with you. For those of you that are jumping on, please throw me a quick yes in the chat and the comments. Just want to make sure you can hear us okay. I'm pretty excited today. I've got my friend here, Precious, that's going to tell us all about the accessory dwelling unit world and kind of what's going on there from start to finish. And Precious, very happy to have you with us today. If you could just tell us a little bit about your background and we'll kind of jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Rich. I'm excited to be a part of the B&B investing community now. So I started my, I guess, like official career. It's been a while, maybe like 7 years ago. I started out in consulting. Never saw myself truly in real estate. It was more so like I knew that I was eventually going to purchase a property. I knew, all the things that they tell us, right? Like real estate is one of the fastest ways, to build wealth, to gain wealth, especially here in America. So I ended up purchasing my first property, and it was really just like, okay, like I've checked it off the list. But when I did that, that was really the start or the beginning of me building a short-term rental business. So that is how like my official start within the real estate industry specifically was to be a short-term rentals. So initially when I had moved to Atlanta about 5 years ago, I put my apartment on Airbnb because I recall, I believe 5 years ago is when the Super Bowl came to Atlanta. I don't know if anybody has been in Atlanta and remembers that, but the Super
Yep.
Bowl came to Atlanta. And I remember so many people, all of my friends were talking about like, yeah, I think I'm going to just rent a room. Like I'm going to throw my living room up. I'm going to throw my house up. And I realized just how much money was coming to the city, especially in terms of people looking for a place to lay their head to experience what is the Super Bowl. And it was basically just a matter of like, okay, I want in on that cash. So I ended up putting the apartment that I had at the time on there. And then what happened was I received a note on my door from the apartment complex because no one really asked permission, especially like pre-pandemic. Like no one asked permission. They were like, hey, you can't do this. But luckily I had already like Super Bowl had passed. I had already made the money and I had just continued to do it because I'm like, all right, this is paying my rent. And it got to a point where it's like, all right, this seems really restrictive, especially when the apartment came, because in my mind, I'm like, well, I pay rent. And if I'm not here because I'm traveling for work, I might as well rent it. But I knew that I couldn't do that. So luckily
Well,
I had.
just on a side note, I don't know if you know, but Airbnb about a year ago rolled out a program that is basically having that be, like an approved apartment list of
Exactly.
places you could do that. You could go away and travel and still do it a short-term rental while you're not there. And so it's kind of becoming more of a known thing that's approved now in that world. So
Exactly. So yes, I
yeah.
did. I do remember seeing that, which made it like so much easier because I recall the days when it's like people were on Google Maps searching for the apartments that are Airbnb approved. So it was super interesting. But I did that, and luckily I was able to save a pretty penny before they actually shut me down, which then contributed to me putting a down payment on a house. Because in my mind, I thought, well, if I made this much money from renting like a less than 700 square foot studio apartment, I can only imagine how much money I would make if I actually get an entire home and now I can do what I will with it. Like it's just a better experience. So I
Nice.
ended up
Yeah.
closing on that property, that very first property, which was super amazing. And for the most part, I'm still working this full-time consulting job. So in and out of the city. So I'm renting that house as well. And that was doing really, really good. And then COVID happened. And so it was about 6 months after I originally bought that property that COVID happened. And now I'm back in this house. This is a big house. At least in my head, it's like, okay, this is 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. It's just me. I don't even have a dog. I don't have a husband. Like it was a lot being there by myself. So I'm like, all right, how can I make this situation work? Because now I was also back for the first time. And I would say at that point, it may have been like at least 8 to 10 months. I had to pay my monthly living expense, whether that's a rent or a mortgage. That was the first time in a while that I had to pay that. And to be quite honest, I did not like that experience because I had gotten used to the real estate paying for your
Yeah.
living arrangements. So that's when I said, okay, how can I easily and safely at the time, because we know COVID was crazy in terms of the pandemic, how can I easily and safely get back to actually renting something out so that I can have extra income coming in and that can pay my living expense and I can kind of be a little more comfortable. And that is when I looked out of my kitchen window at that property. I was in the kitchen at the time when the thought came, and I said, this backyard is huge. And if it's just me, this backyard can fit an entire, like, it's another house. And this was also the time that again, pandemic, a lot of people's lifestyle began to change. So we're seeing so many stories of people living in RVs, or they're going tiny and building tiny homes and homesteads. And I said, okay, I think I can put a tiny house back there. I'm going to relocate into that house, and then at that point I have, like, the house is on the same lot, so there's not going to be an extra expense. Like, I'm going to be able to just go ahead and tap into the utilities. We can make this work. And then now I'm back there and I can safely and effectively rent this house and get rid of my living expense. Because honestly, and anytime I give talks like this, I always say, if you are looking to get into real estate, your number one goal at first needs to just be to get rid of your housing expense. That is the goal. However you do that, it's up to you, but get rid of your housing expense, and it creates so much flexibility and freedom within your mind to think about other avenues to invest.
Love it. House
After
hack.
that, yeah, like, after that thought, it was then just a matter of, all right, like, that is going to be the way that I get back to the point of not having a housing expense for myself. So I started the process of researching and figuring out, okay, is this something that I can do? Like, is this a thing? Can I put this structure on my lot? And I had no idea. Like, even back then, I was still calling it a tiny house, which in essence, in a general sense, it is. But when you are looking to put a structure like on a lot that already has a property, that you already have, let's say, a single family home, a duplex or whatever, the official term for it is accessory dwelling unit. And through my research is how I found out, like, okay, I may not be able to just like throw a tiny house up anywhere, but I can put an accessory dwelling unit in my backyard, and there are certain parameters and restrictions that I have to fit around or stick within in order to make this happen and make it approved for the city. Long story short, 6 months later, we were able to start the build for this house. And I ended up going the route of converting a shed structure that I purchased from, so it's a manufacturer in North Carolina, and they specifically built these sheds. Like, it's similar to your Lowe's or Home Depot sheds, because I know those are super popular right now, especially as they've been coming about. But it's a little more intricate in that, like, they are built to live. They are not just built to store materials or sit in the backyard. They're built to live. So they come insulated. You can customize the windows and doors, all of that. So we started that build, went through a crazy process. And luckily for me, luckily I had the thought to document that process. So I documented the entire build that I had for my ADU, my accessory dwelling unit. And over the course of about 5 months, people were just able to watch what is the experience that I'm going through, from working with the city to working with contractors to actually getting this thing going. Because it's very easy to underestimate, since, well, I mean, it's just a tiny house. Like, it's like 300 square feet. What do you have to worry about? But the thing that I love to remind folks is that these accessory dwelling units up top, right? It's almost like a glacier. Up top, it can look the same. Like, it just looks like, it's small, it's whatever, but they still have all of the same, like the foundation, the utilities, all of that is still exactly the same as it would be if you were building like a standard size new house. Like, you still have to do those process and check those marks. So I think
it's almost like doing a mini new construction, right?
Exactly. It's small, and it's a great way, which is another benefit of these accessory dwelling units, because it's a great way that if you have a small interest in development, you have a small interest in, okay, maybe I do want to construct my own, I don't know, like housing division or whatever. It's a really great way to get into what's called the term small scale development, meaning that you are starting out small with smaller community projects that might have, honestly, many times a little more impact than what you might have if you have a larger structure. But it's a really good way to kind of start to understand the workings of financing, of actually managing this project, working with contractors, all of that. So really good, documented all of that. And it was a 3-episode docuseries. And at that point, the docuseries basically blew up because not a ton of people were talking about this. Like, it was already, of course, we know, like, popular on the West Coast. The West Coast has been doing this. It's tried and true. The regulations they have around this are insane. They actually just recently released like a new one, which is basically saying that homeowners with accessory dwelling units can now sell that accessory dwelling unit almost as like a condo situation. So it's getting really crazy within this landscape. But at the time, that just wasn't necessarily the case. So when people saw my experience, and then on top of that being a young woman, being a Black woman, and going through this, they kind of attached themselves to it, and they're like, okay, well, I had no idea that something like this was possible. How do I get started? Can you help me? Or I'm also going through the same thing, but there were so many hoops that I had to jump through. And that was the start of GatherADU.com, which is what we have now, this technical solution that's helping homeowners to put accessory dwelling units on their properties. It was because we saw that no matter where you go, whether you are on the West Coast, whether you are in the Midwest, whether you are in the South, there's still a disparate and very complicated process around a homeowner who is wanting to do something like this. How can we make this easier? How can we bring more awareness? How can we educate homeowners in a way so that they can do this in a more streamlined way and not feeling overwhelmed with just, I don't even want to call permitting, because we all know how it's a dread knowing that you need to call the city for anything.
Right. Well, I think your timing was pretty good. If I'm recalling the timeline correctly, I think the city of Atlanta basically opened up with certain zoning, and for residential, I think R4 and R5 for the approval to do accessory dwelling units, probably right around the time that you were doing yours, I would imagine, right?
Precisely, exactly. So it was right around that time that the city of Atlanta created a regulation that by right, if you are located in R4, R4A, and R5, then you are able to do an accessory dwelling unit, no problem. Interestingly enough, in most, not all, but most of the zones in Atlanta, you can do a guest house. And that's typically what trips some people up in terms of like, okay, well, if I can do a guest house, that basically means that I can do an accessory dwelling unit, right? Are they the same thing? What's the difference? And they're actually not the same thing. That's a number one thing that I kind of feel like we need to communicate a little better, or the cities need to communicate a little better. But they're not the same thing. But the piece is that they are very, very similar. So a guest house cannot have a kitchen. Number one, like an accessory dwelling unit can have a separate kitchen. It's totally independent. Whereas a guest house cannot have that separate kitchen, because the assumption is that you're likely going into the primary house in order to do that. This is just somewhere for your guests to stay. In addition to that, a guest house can only be like more of like a shorter term situation. Like you're not able to have like longer guests in, because it is a guest house. It is specifically for guests. So you can't rent it out the same way that one would do if they have an accessory dwelling unit and you're wanting to put, a renter in there at market rate. You just wouldn't be able to do that. But that would be like the primary difference between those two. And really, like, you're right on the money, Rich, in terms of like the timing for, number one, the regulations and the conversations that were starting to be had in different cities, in addition to the fact that we got to a point within like the real estate market where things just became like, started to get very tight in terms of the supply that was on the market, and also in terms of like the affordable options that were on the market. In addition to, many cities started to have different conversations around, I guess, reworking or rethinking or reassessing what their zoning codes look like, because it was so like dated and traditional. And, we're still using the terms like servant house and watchman, in our zoning code. So they were starting to have those conversations because they're realizing that where our current zoning code is, it fit amazingly when, we all had the exact same idea of what the American dream was, which is a white picket fence with your single family home on a large lot with a driveway. But now that landscape is changing because the dynamic of even like families these days are changing so much. People are waiting a lot to have kids, so they don't need that larger space, which it all kind of worked together to put us where we are now, which I will say, like, the growth and the success we've been able to experience, a lot of it I have to attribute to time, like the timing of it, of the market, of the housing market, real estate, of just everything.
So let's back up a minute and let's kind of do a little bit of a peeling back on the onion. So
Mhm.
This first one that you did, what was the cost involved? You
Mhm.
mentioned financing. Did you finance some of it? How does that work? Um, how many different contractors did you have to use? Kind of walk us through a little bit of that detail.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with financing, because that's a huge question and honestly one of the major roadblocks when people are wanting to do something like this. So I mentioned that I had purchased the property about 6 months prior to me deciding that, okay, I want to put this structure on there. So even though I had a little bit of equity built up, it was just totally not enough to pool. And it just didn't make sense in my position, I felt like, to go ahead and pool that equity. But I also didn't want to go and take out, a separate, I don't know, a hard money loan or a loan from a private lender in order to make that happen. So what actually helped initially with like the deposit or the down payment for the accessory dwelling unit was all of the funds and the money that I was able to make Airbnb in the house those 6 months prior. So everything, because I still had my full-time job, everything that I was making was either just covering my living expense. And then aside from that, I was just putting that away because I knew that I wanted to continue to rinse and repeat, whether I was going to go buy another house for, Airbnb, or I was going to do something like this where I put the structure behind it. So I ended up going the route of actually using my personal funds in order to do that. So the funds that I made from Airbnb, in addition to, this was kind of like my play. Some people, I get a lot of slack on this. Like, it's like split the room in terms of whether or not they feel this is smart or whether it was like a total bust. For me, I feel like it was super smart, but I opened up because my credit score was amazing at the time too. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to open up some really nice credit cards with a high level of a limit, a high credit limit, but also
Sure.
with really, really good rewards. And they also have a interest, or not, yeah, a 0% like interest rate, like an introductory APR. So I wouldn't have to pay any interest on the money that I was then using for the next 12 months is typically what that introductory rate is. And I knew that, hey, if we finish this build within, let's give it 4 to 6 months, I immediately start renting it out to recoup those funds that then can pay down whatever I've now borrowed against from myself, basically, because it was on my credit. So that's how I ended up financing mine. And honestly, it did work out because I believe by month like 10 or 11 following completing the build and putting it on Airbnb and Furnished Finder and all of those, we had totally broke even, which when you look at the cost for me, because I went the route of converting a shed into a tiny house. And on top of that, I will say that this is pre all of the major logistical and manufacturing issues that happened, like
The supply chain jamming
exactly
up, right?
in the thick of COVID. We were able to get the initial piece done for under $40,000. Now, I will say that afterwards, because you asked me how many contractors I had to work with, I went through 3 contractors, fired the first set of 2. Like, folks were doing things and it's like, this is my first development project, I'm getting scammed, they're not being honest. It was just a ton going on. So I went through 3 before I finally got on one that he actually completed that project. So
Okay.
including what the things that we had to fix and remediate from those first 2, you can tack
Yeah.
on I'd say about $10,000 to $12,000. So all in, I was still under about 60K, which for me that was like my top level budget. Because
Yeah.
going in, I will totally say I underestimated. Like, when I started drafting and researching, I'm like, all right, like I feel like I can do this with like $30,000 because the folks on YouTube are converting containers and creating whole communities. How, I have no idea, but because they were doing it so low, I'm like, all right, I think this could work. But one of the things that I've learned now, being in the thick of this and being in the thick of real estate is whatever budget you believe you have,
Yeah.
you should probably tack on at least 10 to 15 more percent, at least to be
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah. I say 20%. Just add 20% to it.
Yeah,
Because
because it's
there's always the shit happens that you don't think about. Contractors that don't do the right thing and so on. With knowing what you know now, would you recommend you kind of engage separately with a licensed electrician, a licensed plumber, and then more kind of a general contractor to do the build, or is it just one contractor that can do everything?
So initially I actually tried to go separate in hiring, like, okay, someone that's able to build out the concrete, someone that's able to do the electric, someone that's doing the plumbing. If I could go back,
I'd actually hire an experienced general contractor who has contacts for all of those little pieces.
Right.
And then they are just managing everything, because looking back, I mean, I managed it all, and it shows in the docuseries. Like, there are points where it's like, I'm crying, I'm upset, I don't know how like these things are happening. And it's because I was trying to manage so much, in addition to also, again, still working full time. And now, like, halfway through the build for the tiny house, I was able to start back renting, because I mean, if you were in Atlanta during the pandemic, like nothing, we didn't close for too long.
Right.
We didn't
Right.
close for too long at all.
It was like 3 weeks.
Exactly. It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. So looking back, I would actually like find an experienced person who knows these different people. And if I just so happen to have a better plumber that I've just always worked with and I trust them, then I'd loop them in with that general contractor so that they can complete that piece of the project. But my major mistake was, like, honestly, not seeking warm connections of contractors, if that makes sense. Like, not asking like, hey, have you worked with anyone? Do you have a referral? Like, really, I just did like a search. Do you guys have good reviews online? Do you have a nice Facebook where people aren't like totally bashing everything that you're doing? Okay, cool. And that was my criteria. But I'm realizing, like, a major criteria, especially in real estate, is relationships. It's your network. It's the people that you know and those referrals. So being able to work with a contractor who's someone else who you can trust their word has also worked with.
Yeah.
Golden.
Yeah.
Time.
Totally agree. So tell us a little bit about the zoning and permitting process. I mean, was there a delay with that? Is there something special you have to do because it is an ADU? How does that look?
So there was definitely a delay in it. Remembering that I basically started all of this in the thick of everything. This was about April or May 2020 when I basically started the research and then also started to submit some of that permitting information. And at the same time, this was also when all of those government offices were basically like finally getting used to Zoom, or starting to get used to Zoom and starting to take everything online. So there were some delays there just because they were transitioning from an actual in-person permitting process to now what the city of Atlanta has is actually, it's totally digital. So you can completely submit it online. So they were transitioning from that. But I will say that in terms of permitting specifically for an accessory dwelling unit, there is nothing special, I would say, that you need. Like, if you don't have a land survey, it is required by the city of Atlanta now to have that land survey. But there was nothing special about it. It was really just a matter of everything that you need is outlined very clearly on the City of Atlanta website. The problem that you run into, or at least that I ran into at the time, was because accessory dwelling units were they were kind of a newer concept. And you can have one office, let's say like the Office of Building and Planning, because they've talked about this, because they've heard the reviews or whatever it is, they know exactly what you're talking about and they can bypass whatever. Whereas you call a different day, or you call to get an update on the status of your application, and a totally different person or a different department within that realm, they're telling you something totally different because they're just not used to this. They're like, wait, a shed? Like, this doesn't quite make sense. And that was the major piece that I ran into with the Office of Zoning and Permitting, is that. And then in addition to that, I just really, if I can be honest, I had no idea how much Atlanta cared about their trees. They are very serious about the trees. They are very serious about the trees and preserving them.
I think that's a good thing, right? I mean, I migrated down here from New York decades ago for that reason, for the trees down here. So I think they do a good job of mixing within the city to have both. So what expanded from there? So you got that one set up. You moved into the main house, or you moved into the
no,
shed,
I moved,
and then Airbnb'd it.
So I moved. So during the process, exactly. Okay. So I had gotten back to renting the primary home on Airbnb, and it was doing really, really well. Again, I was surprised. I was very much surprised in the midst of the pandemic. It was doing as well as it had. And then we were building the ADU in the back, and I actually moved elsewhere. So I took a what do they call, like delayed gratification, in that, okay, I'm going to go to a place that's really, really cheap, and it's going, because at the time, again, I'm paying for this ADU build as well. So it's like, I can't go spending a ton of money. I actually rented a house from my neighbor. Rented a room in her house from a neighbor for like $250, like a steal, especially in this market at this point. But I rented that because it allowed me, number one, like I'm still close enough to, if any contractors need to meet me at the house, I'm right there. But then also it allowed me to save a ton of money that I was pocketing. So did that. And then once we actually finished the build, I then moved into an apartment because we had enough cash flow coming in. And now at that point, I was renting both that primary home in addition to the ADU in the back. In addition to, I had then acquired another house that was maybe like 2 blocks away, and that was doing really well. And then I was in the process of closing on 5 rental arbitrage corporate leasing units.
Very cool. So on the ADU, you're essentially, it's like a studio or like a 1-bedroom apartment, right? So you've got a kitchen, a bathroom, and like, is it a private bedroom, or is it just kind of an open area where there's a bed?
So it could be a private bedroom. For customers that we work with, we do have floor plans available that allow you to have like private, you can close the door. The one that I have is a studio. So the bed is totally open in the open living area. And then you do have kind of like a kitchen nook, a full kitchen, because when I was building and designing this, I'll be honest in that I had myself in mind. The only reason that I actually went ahead and just like it and started renting it on a full-time basis is because of all of the mistakes with the contractors and all of the money that we had then started to lose. And I'm like, okay, I have to get this back. But yeah, so it has a full bathroom as well. The bathroom is separately, has a shower, toilet, flushing toilet. I like to clarify that. And a bathroom, not a compost.
And what was the, so you just kind of tied into the main sewer system from the main house, basically.
Exactly, which makes it it makes it a lot easier because I do know that like it can be a little more complicated when you are on a property that is sitting on septic. But being able to tap into like the city water was something that was super easy. Well, easy is relative, but it was like pretty simple. And then on top of that, being able to tap into the electric for the main house too. So because I was planning on being in there, I actually did not separately meter it, but you totally can if you would like to, especially for those folks that are like, hey, I want to rent this out.
For sure. And so what was the square footage on the first one you did?
The square footage of my ADU is 297 square feet, and that includes the front porch.
Wow. So less than 300 square feet. And what was your average nightly rate?
I would say like 115, but there were, I specifically recall days where it's like, I could totally jump it up on like a day, maybe like the Braves were playing, there's a nice sports game, or it's a holiday. The highest I think I had charged for one night in the ADU was like 260. That was the highest. And I still feel like I could have went higher. I still feel like I could.
What was the size of the bed? Queen or full?
Queen.
And so did you get a lot of like, I mean, I'm sure the listing had the space for 2 people. Was it mostly one person that would book it, or would you get a lot of people that were 2 people?
I would say it was half and half, like couples and just folks that are like single. They might be in town for work, or they're just wanting to experience like a tiny house. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. And so I'm seeing a question in the comments. Guys, throw some questions out there. We're going to go for about another 10 minutes. And if there's anything that you have for questions, we're going to handle that towards the end of the session. So feel free to throw any questions you guys might have, and we'll try to get to those here pretty quickly. So walk me through what happened next. You know, you've got all these corporate listings. You've kind of got all these short-term rentals going, and where was the light bulb moment that said, you know what, I'm going to show other people how to do this?
Oh gosh, I mean, I would say that started to happen. That happened. It was at the onset of when I started the ADU build that I said, I'm going to show other people how to do this, because I do specifically remember at the time, I recall end of 2019, I was renting that primary home, and I've always been someone to like, I build in public. Like, you're going to know, like when I'm pivoting, when I'm building, what area I'm in or what have you. So many people were already following me because they saw and they knew that I was doing Airbnb as a side hustle. So they wanted to already know, like, okay, how can I get started? What can I do? And that year that we had started, like right at the tail end of that year that we started the ADU build, I recall from just one of my properties, I had made about $50,000 that year. And that was like a big piece that kind of I used. Again, I have a background in marketing, that I really used that to then push the platform that I created to start teaching short-term rentals and all of that, which was and is Airbnb Money. Gosh, yeah, Airbnb Money was amazing. I would say primarily built on Instagram, but then also YouTube. It was like more of like a community-based business. So we had a complete mentorship. I released an ebook around it. There were different monthly webinars that we do, like super, super amazing. And really like the differentiator that it was for me was, okay, we're not just teaching you, like, I'm not helping you to build an Airbnb business. We are building a short-term rental business, and you're actually like learning the underlying business principles around this, setting up your LLC and doing everything that you need to do, actually getting and setting up a team as well, so that you can get what you really want out of this, which is the freedom. Because
Right.
I'm sure you know, Rich, but like Airbnb can very quickly become just another job. Like and another job where you're working even more than you were working in the 9 to 5 that you had. So that happened, and I had started to teach people. And then once the tiny house actually launched, and I did an entire campaign around that, released the docuseries, that's when more folks started to come to me for like consultations around accessory dwelling units specifically. And in the midst of those conversations, like so many folks were requesting it, to where I'm like, all right, we can set up a portal, we can start doing these conversations. But it was just so different with an accessory dwelling unit project, an ADU project, because like there's longevity in it. Like folks you can't get everything you need in just one 30-minute session. So that's when it then started to become like, all right, how can and I forgot to mention as well, the following year the same year that the ADU went live is when I actually quit my full-time job. So this year has made like 2.5 years. I think I'm at 2.5 years. And had quit that job. And at that point, it's like, okay, I'm teaching full time. I still do my speaking because I've always just been like a paid speaker. So I'm still doing my speaking, and we're still making money from these Airbnb units. But I will say that things were like, I was growing faster than I could handle, if I can be totally honest. Like the business, the offers that were coming in, and because I was marketing it so well, there were people that were reaching out and wanting to do business and wanting to partner, and hey, can we like go in and do a joint venture deal? Those offers and opportunities were coming in way quicker than I could handle. And it got to a point where, I'll be honest, in that I got really overwhelmed with the business. Like we had a cleaning team, I had a management team, but it still felt like there was like so much anxiousness around it, if it makes sense. Like I remember my very first property, like putting that one, which once you guys are in here, like you put your first property on there, sometimes there are folks, many people, because I've taught like over 100 folks at this point about this as well, but many of them, you get so connected, you're connected to that first one, to where it's like you're kind of watching it like a hawk. It's like, oh my gosh, they got the doors open, they left the lights on, like all of these little things. And that anxiousness that comes with just like having folks in a space where like your name is on it. If anything goes wrong, you are responsible. I started to just I was so anxious, and it probably like also played into the stress of the pandemic, because everyone like started to everyone was feeling this, right? Like just a lot of stress just in general in life. But it was the stress of the pandemic, to where I was just like, all right, am I really happy here? Still, am I still happy? Because I started to almost feel like, if I can be honest, I'll be frank, a glorified property manager. And I had never seen myself in property management. Like I love consulting, I love teaching, and that is what I wanted to continue to do. But I knew that on the path that I was going, of continuing to scale, continuing to teach people in this, I was getting deeper and deeper and deeper into that industry, into that role, into that brand of people knowing me as that. So it honestly got to a point at the end of 2021. This is also when, again, the market started to shift, that I then decided, no, I'm missing something. I was starting to receive messages from folks, because this is also when, if you all are in real estate and you remember kind of the housing market at the time, at the top of the pandemic, it was like, okay, like it's a seller's market. Like people are getting a lot of money and you can get in and you can buy these houses. And then it flipped like totally, to where it's like, okay, we didn't even know if it was a seller or a buyer's market. It's just like the market is just on fire right now. It's terrible. And it got to a point where people were reaching out and they were saying, hey, I've been displaced. Like, hey, my rent went up I don't know, 20%, 30% or whatever. And now like I'm just trying to find somewhere, at least for now, where I can be close to where I work. I can be close to my daughter's school because I'm still figuring all of this out. And I'll be honest in that after like the first or second message, I'm like, oh no, like you kind of ignore those, because I was very like adamant on only renting to tourists, only people that are coming in from out of town, and only the people that are willing to pay the highest dollar. That was my motto, because Airbnb money, we're here to make money, right? But after, I would say maybe like the 10th or 11th message like that, something just started to pull on me. And again, in addition to balancing that with like the stress that I was already experiencing, I had made the decision that, okay, we're going to wrap these short-term rentals up. We're going to turn the units, at least that I own, into longer term, month to month. Like I believe we tried out month to month first, and month to month was really well. But now I try to stick between like a 6 month and 1 year lease, 6 month and 12 month lease. But we tried out month to month, and really just like renting, being intentional with who we're renting to. So no longer just renting to like the tourist or, you know, the people that are coming in from out of town, but now really figuring out where in this market, or who is the niche, who's the segment that I can still rent to for a really like a decent amount of cash, a decent amount of a nightly rate, but also like not experience as many issues and not feel as bad for, you know, like, because for me, I don't know, I started to feel bad. I'm like, wait, like these are houses that it's like, you know, this single dad who just reached out to me, he could probably be in that apartment, maybe if I wasn't, you know, whatever. So that's just kind of where my mind went to. At the end of that year, I said, you know what, we're going to transition. And it was the perfect storm as well, because that was also when the docuseries started to really blow up. And I had more and more people reaching out, asking to help with the ADUs. So it
So what's the regulatory environment like with ADUs across the country? Because I know you help folks not only just here in Georgia, but in other states as well. So what does that framework look like?
I mean, I have to be honest in that it varies. It varies city to city, and many times it varies county to county in terms of what it looks like. Like I mentioned, West Coast, they're going to be far more flexible. The one thing that is common across wherever you go, each state, is that they are having conversations around this. It's just a matter of where along that timeline are they in the conversation. Is it just now starting and sparking, where they're kind of having community discussions, trying to figure out, okay, like, is this something that we can make happen? Or are we further down the pipeline to where it's like they're in a process of getting started with, you know, actually like approving the legislation for something like this? Here in Georgia, I would say like we're kind of at that midpoint. Like there are at least like major cities like city of Atlanta. I know DeKalb County as well is one of the places, or honestly a couple of places, but one of the places that definitely you can do an accessory dwelling unit. But then at that point, it really all depends on like how their regulations are lining up in terms of how you can do that. So in the city of Atlanta, like you can only do detached units, whereas many people don't realize accessory dwelling units, they can be detached, meaning like I have in my backyard. They can be attached, meaning, you know, it's you're adding on a separate structure or, you know, livable space. It can be in the garage, it can be in the basement, what have you. But ADU is like a comprehensive term for just another accessory space that you have on that property.
Okay, so the person that was asking about DeKalb County specifically, so you do know that you are able to do ADUs in DeKalb, similar to how you can do it in Fulton and Atlanta.
Exactly. And I saw the comment around not being able to have a kitchen. That might be because you might be in a place where it specifically allows guest houses, but not ADUs. And that's likely why they may have said that it couldn't have a kitchen.
Okay, and then the other question in regards to ADUs on Fulton County Tax Assessor's website, when looking for R4, R5, are we looking under property class or under zoning?
Great question. You're going to be looking under zoning. Sometimes folks are zoned, like your zoning is R4, but then your property class is actually R3. I believe, don't hold me to this, but I do believe that with the property class, that is specifically on how you are taxed, whereas the zoning is more so what you can and cannot build.
Got it. All right. And then how do we know which states you can help out in? You know, a lot of our members are kind of across the country, mostly in the Southeast, but are there certain states that you focus on right now where you can help folks get started with ADUs?
No, really, it's across the board because we're still identifying and kind of like getting a lay of the land of which cities are open to this. So if you go to our website, you can go ahead and search your property address, and you'll get, I would say, more of a vague answer, but it will allow you to set up a call with us to where we come to that call, and we will know whether or not you can do this for sure, whether or not you cannot, based on what we're finding on your MUNA code, your zoning, or even by calling your local city.
All right. And then as we're getting close to closing down here, how do you guys actually, help clients when you engage? Obviously you've got a lot of experience and you've done this multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
What just high level kind of what steps along the way are you helping us with?
Yeah, so specifically what we help with is what's called pre-construction planning services. So everything that is happening before that structure is either built or placed on your property, that is what we're helping with. So the design of the actual structure, actually mapping out floor plans, architectural plans, site plans, getting all of that completed and finished, and then actually connecting you with the financing and the contractors to go ahead and make that happen. So we work with the city on your behalf and submit those permits and draft everything for you, to where the only thing that you really need to worry about is what color do you want the unit and where are we gonna place it. So that's how we do it. And then we have our service fee, and which honestly, depending on where you are, it could range anywhere from about like $3,500 to maybe $5,000. I would say that 5,000 mark is really on more of like the West Coast.
Got it. All right. Well, I'll put your website in the comments on this, so folks that are watching this now can get access to it, and folks that are going to watch the replay. So Precious, I know we're kind of closing it down, so I really appreciate you taking the time today. I'd love to invite you back and kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive, step by step when we've got some more time. We definitely can try to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks so much for taking the time, and thanks everybody for watching this week. B&B Investing Group helps investors that want to scale a short-term rental business, and so feel free to reach out to me if that's something of interest and you're ready to take action now. And so, Precious, once again, thank you so much, and take care. Thanks for coming. Thanks everybody. Take care.